This was posted at Reddit subforum No Sleep by user jealous_economy_7684 title. If you come across an electronic toy called Mr. Bits, throw it away immediately. Do you remember Giga Pets? If the odd-sounding name doesn't ring a bell, it's because you're not in the age range to appreciate such a notable entry in the oversized book that is 90s nostalgia. As an adult in his early 30s, I vividly remember being ensnared in that perfect storm of a fad like the rest of my childhood peers. For those still reading this in a state of, Giga Pets were a cultural phenomenon that swept the globe overnight, placing them in that prestigious club of useless bullshit that you have no choice but to buy. A club already populated with such brilliant contributions to humanity like fidget spinners and Pokémon cards. Keychain friendly and half the size of your standard egg, Giga Pets each contained a tiny, pixelated animal of your choosing. While this selection would begin with obvious choices like dogs, cats, and gerbils, the soon-to-be marketed juggernaut would eventually offer choices like space aliens, Godzilla and Yoda. Yes, as in Yoda, the Muppet from Star Wars. Giga Pets would inevitably give way to a horde of alternating brands that would include the fan favorite that would become known as Tamagotchi. While this all might sound confusing, the basic objective would always remain the same. Your goal was to raise this tiny creature into the magical land of adulthood. This would be accomplished through a meticulous regimen of feeding, grooming, and exercise. Some pets would evolve into completely new forms to show their budding maturity, while others would just show an increase in size. Choosing to opt out of the responsibilities of caretaker would sooner or later translate into a cruel and untimely death for the fake creature. It was a fad that was damn near impossible to outmaneuver. Living in a third-world hellhole would have been the only option that would have spared you from having to see those brightly colored devices dangling from nearly everyone's keychain. Then, as if stolen by a thief in the night, the hype and craze simply vanished. Giga Pets were casually discarded and forgotten by the world at large. Over the years you'd randomly find the once object of some kid's affection at the bottom of some bargain bin at your local Walmart until the day came when even that option was no longer viable. My reintroduction into the world of Giga Pet wouldn't take place at a Walmart. No, my chance encounter with the aforementioned 90s trigger would end up spiraling into something much more sinister. Hindsight is definitely fucking 2020. Had I known then what I know now, I would have sent those pangs of nostalgia back where they fucking came from. Don't be fooled. This story isn't about some grown-ass man longing for the gleeful days of yesteryear. There's no glee or fondness in the words that you're about to read. This story has more in common with a nightmare. What fragments of a life that I have left have now become synonymous with absolute dread. When you're done reading this, you won't question why I suddenly stopped leaving my house after dark. You won't question my ongoing bouts with crippling insomnia. More importantly, you won't question why I just installed new deadbolts on all the doors in my apartment. This story isn't about Giga Pets. This story is about Mr. Bits. While it seems like forever ago, there was a time when my entanglements with insomnia were willfully chosen by yours truly. This, now foreign concept would play an important role in my then leisurely sleep patterns. I would stay up for hours browsing Amazon for random things whose purchase I could justify with a new Prime account. The night it all began started like so many others. With a morning shift at work looming, I convinced myself that the time I was currently investing in online shopping was not for my own selfish needs but Zach's. Zach was the 7-year-old son of Harper, the woman I had been dating for nearly a year at that point. Zach's birthday was swiftly approaching and I hadn't the slightest fucking clue what to get the kid. What began as a scroll through the various entries in the Modern Kid Playbook quickly took a more in-depth turn once I decided to skip the obvious choices and spring for something a bit more unique. This online journey would bring me to a private Amazon seller titled Decade Dumps. This retailer specialized in a treasure trove of overpriced trinkets spanning back at least 4 decades, all of them categorized for easy access. I had my sights set on a slightly used Stretch Armstrong when my eyes caught a glimpse of a much more promising selection. Hot 90s rare find Giga Pet Kitty Cat. Never used, still in the box. You won't find a better deal anywhere else. This supposed deal was listed with a very non-bargain price tag of $79.85. Even with words like a rip-off pushing their way to the front of my thought train, I reverted to my nasty habit of justification. Even if there was a better deal lurking around on the internet, I would have had to invest more time and energy on finding it. With only 4 hours of sleep to spare before my alarm forced me back up, I hit the checkout button and closed my laptop. The package had been scheduled to arrive within 2 business days of the time that I had originally ordered the fucking thing. At the time, I assumed that such a short window would have given me more than enough time to stay ahead of Zach's birthday party, which was to take place at the end of the month, a cluster of days that still seemed a ways out seeing as how there was still 3 weeks left in the month. Weeks went by with no sign of Zach's birthday present. I sent dozens of emails to whoever was supposedly in charge of the decade dumps. There would be no responses back. After a bit of digging, Elle found a phone number that I assumed to be for customer service. I dialed the number half a dozen times. The majority of the calls would end with a garbled sound of auditory mayhem that reminded me of one of those dial-up modems from the early days of the internet, only much louder and a hell of a lot more distorted. It wouldn't be until the final call that I got a hold of an actual human being. I couldn't tell if the person on the other end was a man or woman because what few words I could make out were spoken with low, monotone inflections. Already frustrated, I explained the situation regarding my missing Giga Pet. Once I was sure that the problem had been successfully articulated, I sat for what seemed like minutes, impatiently pressing the phone to my ear as I waited for the individual to respond with some kind of solution. A loud disjointed sound caused me to snap up in unexpected shock. As the noise quickly dissipated, I began to hear this low, repetitive hum fluctuating in the background on their end. I spoke into the receiver to confirm whether or not I was even talking to anyone after hearing such a strange sound over the phone. "Hello? Did I lose you?" I could make out breathing before the person spoke for the first time since the conversation had started. "Why would I be lost?" The response was oddly out of place. So much so that I just sat for a few seconds, basking in my own silence. "We're sold out of the kitty pet," the person croaked out from their end. "What are you talking about?" I said louder than I should have. "It was listed on your page as available. I ordered the goddamn thing and I even received a confirmation number." The voice spoke once more. "Replacement pet?" Unable to make out exactly what was being said, I simply countered with the stupefied reaction that was, "Huh." The phone clicked off after that. When I called back, I was greeted by a secondary voice, a woman explaining to me in that ever so familiar parlance that the number I had been trying to reach was now disconnected. As the recording ended, I could feel a cold chill creeping down my spine. Something wasn't sitting well about my odd interaction with the mysterious person I had just spoken to over the phone. Even then, in those moments following the whole interaction, I could instinctively tell that I was turning onto a path in which there would be no turning back. Having no one to direct my anger toward, I compromised by typing up a shitty email before sending the profanity-laced complaint to the good folks at Amazon customer service. I promptly gave up any and all hope of ever seeing that fucking package and defaulted on Zach's birthday gift. I can't remember exactly what I got him, but I'm 90% sure it was some kind of overhyped gaming system that was expensive enough to nab some extra boyfriend points with his mother. The package in question landed at my doorstep nearly a month later. It took a few moments for me to even remember what the hell it was. I opened the outer Amazon Prime box only to see a tiny, cardboard box placed perfectly at the center of a flattened layer of packing peanuts. There were no outer markings on the package to distinguish it as anything worth looking at. The surface of the box was scratched up and the edges were frayed as if someone had decided to play a game of soccer with it beforehand just for shits and giggles. 2 items would fall out of the box as I ripped it open. The first would be a folded piece of wrinkled printing paper that appeared to be as fucked up as the box it was packaged within. The uneven lettering was printed in blotchy red ink and scattered along the page's interior. Congratulations, you are now the proud owner of your very own Mr. Bits. Just because he clawed his way out of hell does not mean he won't need your attention and care. With a little love and a lot of luck, Mr. Bits will have no problem showing the world his true form. The secondary item followed the trend of creepy that was currently taking place. While the item resembled the basic look of Giga Pets that I had seen in the past, its design was an immediate departure from any prior designs that I had laid my eyes on. The craptastic paint job was that of a faded gray with chipped edges. The standard issue LCD screen was encased in the center of the cheap plastic casing. Below the screen was the basic layout of buttons one would expect from the devices such a knockoff would replicate. A single alteration came in the form of an extra button placed in the upper left-hand corner of the toy. The button was half the size of its peers and painted bright red. I had to squint hard to see a tiny, faded arrow suspended above the button. This ghastly symbol led to a jumbled cluster of miniature letters that used to spell something out before being nearly rubbed out of existence. The device was adorned with more text and another symbol. This aforementioned glyph sat at the very top of the device. To the casual observer, this symbol would have been easily described as a hollow, black sphere showcasing a smaller, black cross at the very top. At that moment I would have easily fallen into the casual observer category. That would all change in the days that followed this lackluster unboxing. More on that part later. Centered at the very bottom was an enlarged block of equally black text that read, Mr. Bits, your digital pal. I was already teetering on the idea of gathering up all the cheap garbage so I could apathetically dispose of the whole fucking fiasco. But like so many other tragedies in waiting, I bitched out to simple curiosity. While its fate had already been sealed, I still felt the need to follow this shit train to the very end. I pulled out the clear, plastic strip that supposedly kept the batteries from being used until activation. Based on my prior interaction with similar devices, I knew that the screen should have been flashing something, anything in the seconds that followed my removal of the transparent strip. All the buttons were then pressed in various patterns, a futile last-ditch effort to breathe life into whatever the fuck Mr. Bits was supposed to be. Nothing, just a blank LCD screen and the frustration that accompanies the sobering knowledge of knowing that my already drafty bank account was officially $70 and blah cents shorter than it should have been. In a sudden burst of anger, I flung the Giga Pet wannabe across the kitchen. My consolation prize would be awarded in the guise of a near unachievable trick shot that sent the crappy hunk of plastic speeding into the bottom of a trash can, inconveniently located at the furthest end of the tile-lined eating space. I went to bed that night with the simple satisfaction that I had at least done something right. A little advice about short-lived victories from a guy who considers himself to be somewhat of a brown belt in that department. They're fucking short-lived. My double dose of reality would be hand-delivered in the head-crunching form of a debilitating migraine. I'm not twisting your chain or anyone else's when I thoroughly stress just how excruciating existence had suddenly become. The pain would begin around midnight. In those early stages, the ache was still taking baby steps around a brain cavity, trying desperately to ignore it. I was no stranger to the occasional pain fest that tended to rattle around up there every once in a while. It was a random ailment that was easily fixed by passing out for a few hours. I assumed that the same rules would apply to the bouncing bundle of hurt that was about to loose its training wheels and get down to business. Well, you know what they say about assuming things. Something compound word. Something, morals, and lessons. Blah, blah, your brain is about to feel like that one slutty girl on prom night. The crescendo busted its nut sometime around 3 a.m. I couldn't ignore the pain any longer, as I was forcefully pushed from the comfort of my warm mattress. Luckily for me and the carpet, my bedroom was the kind that came pre-packaged with an adjoining bathroom a few feet away. One shit can short and I would have never made it down anyone's hallway. The vomit spewed forth like a civil rights-era fire hose. William Friedkin would have creamed his pants had he seen what my convulsing body was cooking up in that kitchen. I blacked out only to wake up to a glowing effigy dedicated to the god of puke. I'm not blowing smoke, but I did blow chunks. Again, I reiterate the part about being a fire hose. The beating that tiny bathroom took was legendary. Somebody could have written their college thesis on how the hell so much yuck was able to come out of a man my size. Once I was convinced that my stomach was siphoned of any and all fluids, I fell back onto the tile below me. Look where you leap was nowhere to be found in my vocabulary, seeing as how my fall was cushioned by a stagnant puddle of adjacent pea soup. I quickly got up, pulling off the marinated sweatpants. Before I could make it back to my room, I stopped dead in my tracks because that's when I first caught wind of it. The secluded source of my dismay. The pain had been so excruciating, I hadn't even noticed it at first. It was then, and only then, that I could hear it. I could hear that sound buzzing in the back of my throbbing brain like a vibrating cell phone. It's hard for me to articulate the specifics of said sound. If I were to simplify it on the most basic level, I'd tell you that the sound was reminiscent of rumbling bass. You know, like the kind of vibration that you get from the subwoofer in a home theater system. And while words to describe that sound escape me, I have no problem whatsoever describing what would happen next. Before we tread any further, you should know that I'm not a drug user, nor does my drink intake consist of anything stronger than Red Bull. The only thing I had in my system at the time was the remaining portion of a 2-liter drive. Pepper. Naturally, I was as confused as any rationally thinking human would be if they saw what I saw, suddenly materialized in the air a few feet above them. It was an arrow, a digital arrow. An image that should never have been visualized the two-dimensional confines of a video screen. And yet, there it was. Hanging there, suspended from tangible reality as it repetitively blinked in and out of existence. The arrow glowed a dull gray and was rendered with such detail, that if you paid close attention, you could even see the hundreds of tiny pixels that it appeared to be formed from. I know that because I had to have stared at the creepy fucking thing for over an hour. I didn't move, didn't say a word, just stood there, muted, in awe of this object that shouldn't have been. Eventually, I managed to summon enough fortitude to push forward. My first attempts at physical contact were displayed in a series of swats. Each time I'd watch my hand pass through it, effortlessly each time. It was only after I was exhausted from multiple attempts, that the started blinking out only to suddenly reappear in a new location. I began to follow the digital symbol as it used this new behavior as a means to propel itself out the bathroom and into my room. This slow journey would then extend beyond my bedroom, through the hallway, beyond the living room, and into the dark kitchen. The arrow would stop mid-air again, tilting so that it pointed downward at the trash can beneath, the dull light illuminating the receptacle's white, plastic exterior. The arrow vanished a few seconds later, returning to wherever the fuck it came from, to begin with. Another noise would then join the party, an electronic screech coming from the depths of the trash can. I reached in, only to pull out what I already knew to be waiting down there. Mr. Bits, only the screen facing me was no longer dead. I was looking down at the glowing device, positioned at the center of my palm. The image on display was a dead body laying on a table, in what was either a laboratory or morgue. The incredibly shitty graphics made it difficult to decipher. The body's stomach was expanding and contracting in a series of pixelated movements. I noticed right away that the sound, the headache, both of them ceased the moment the device touched my hand. I tested this theory by setting Mr. Bits down, only to move away from it at various increments. It became immediately apparent that the moment Mr. Bits left my person, the pain would come back. The further I got away, the worse the pain got until I finally felt like I was having a full-on stroke. I went back to bed with Mr. Bits resting a few feet away on the nearby pillow. Mr. Bits went to work with me that morning. I use the word work loosely because I had spent the majority of the day huddled in my cubicle as I tried to Google my way towards some answers. It was a useless venture. There was nothing remotely available on either Mr. Bits or any company that might have had a hand in its creation. What I did get was a sound in my desk drawer, eerily similar to the sound I heard coming from the bottom of the trash can the night before. After pulling the device from my desk drawer, I could see what the fuss had been about. The body was still there, laying on the table, only now the stomach no longer looked as if it were breathing. It looked like something had burst out from the inside. Pixelated gore coated the miniature landscape. My eyes drifted down to see what had caused the digital carnage. The little creature crawled back and forth across the screen in an agitated pace. A humanoid skull sat atop a skittering base made of 6 spider-like legs. If you looked hard enough, you could see that there were 2 small eyes peering through the bony jaw that hung loosely open as it jolted in the various directions. It did this while looking up multiple times as if the tiny thing was expecting something from me. In the top, right-hand corner of the screen was a cluster of stats. The date, the time along with words that simply read. Phase 1, larval form. I stared at the screen, my heartbeat thudding in my ears as if trying to drown out the sight of the grotesque creature. Phase 1, I muttered, my voice barely above a whisper. My hand trembled as I set the device down on the desk. Surely this was some twisted joke. A gag gift, something programmed by a deranged developer. But then I remembered the pain, the impossible, skull-splitting pain that only ceased when Mr. Bits was near. This wasn't just a toy. It wasn't a clever prank. Whatever Mr. Bits was, it had latched onto me in a way I couldn't shake. The thing on the screen paused in its frenetic pacing and turned its tiny, pixelated skull toward me. Its jaw opened, and text appeared in the space above it. Feed me. The command was simple, yet the implications filled me with dread. What the hell was I supposed to feed this thing? Before I could think, the screen shifted, presenting a menu with symbols that appeared to represent various items: a heart, a fish, a bottle, and a tiny skull. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the buttons. Feeding it seemed like a bad idea, but ignoring it felt worse. I pressed the button for the fish icon. The screen flickered, and a low, guttural sound emitted from the device as the creature devoured the offering. Its movements became smoother, more deliberate, and text scrolled across the top of the screen. Satisfied, for now. I exhaled a shaky breath and placed Mr. Bits back in my desk drawer, hoping that ignoring it might cause it to fade into irrelevance. But the moment the drawer clicked shut, the piercing sound returned, boring into my skull. I yanked the drawer open and grabbed the device, and the pain instantly stopped. My coworkers gave me odd looks, but I didn't care. I couldn't let go of the damn thing without suffering. The days that followed were a blur of growing dread. Every morning, the creature on the screen looked different, larger, more grotesque. Its stats updated as it progressed through its phases. By phase 3, it had developed a torso and arms, its spindly fingers clawing at the edges of the screen as though testing the boundaries of its digital prison. It was clear that feeding it wasn't enough. Each time I missed one of its incessant demands, whether for food, attention, or something cryptically labeled as sustenance, the pain returned tenfold. My nights were plagued by dreams of the creature, its hollow eyes staring into mine, whispering in a voice that felt like static scraping against my brain. Let me out. By phase 5, I noticed changes in my surroundings. Objects would shift positions when I wasn't looking. Shadows stretched unnaturally in the corners of my apartment. And then there was the smell, an acrid, metallic scent that seemed to emanate from Mr. Bits itself. One night, as I sat in my dimly lit living room, the screen of the device glitched, and for a moment, I swore I saw my own face reflected in its display. But it wasn't my face, it was something twisted, something wrong. Before I could process it, the creature reappeared, now nearly filling the entire screen. Its jaw opened wide, and text scrolled across the top. Phase 6, release me. No, I whispered, my voice shaking. I won't. The screen flickered, and the creature's face twisted into something resembling a grin. My apartment lights dimmed, and the static-like sound I'd heard over the phone that day returned, louder, more menacing. The device grew warm in my hand, almost too hot to hold, and I felt a pressure building in my chest, a suffocating weight that threatened to crush me. With a surge of desperation, I hurled Mr. Bits across the room. It struck the wall and fell to the floor, the screen cracking but still glowing. The pain returned immediately, sharp and unbearable, but I forced myself to move. I grabbed the device, wrapped it in a towel, and shoved it into a metal box I found in my closet. Then, without thinking, I ran outside and drove to the nearest river. I hurled the box into the water and watched as it sank beneath the surface. The pain didn't stop, but I felt a fleeting sense of relief, until I got back to my apartment. The box was sitting on my kitchen count wire, dry and untouched. The screen of Mr. Bits glowed brightly, the creature staring at me with eyes that now seemed far too real. The same gut-wrenching text flashing across YHE's screen over and over again. Phase 6, release me. Phase 6, release me. Phase 6, release me. This isn't a warning, it's too late for that. It's a plea. If you ever see a Gigapet knockoff, a strange device with a name like Mr. Bits, don't buy it. Don't touch it, don't even look at it. I promise, you'll thank me later.